Let me introduce myself first. So I'm Dr. Angel D. I'm the person behind the Growing Brain PH. When I made the social media page before, ang intention po talaga was to support parenting and the parenting journey. So some of you have been with me in the Q&A before. I saw some of the advanced questions and they were actually families na na-meet ko na rin po sa clinic. And so this year, this 2022 po kasi, naka-receive po tayo ng grant, kumbaga financial grant support for this program to answer parent questions on a monthly basis. Kung sakali hindi makapunta sa pediatrician or baka na-miss yung question or you might not have thought to ask it in the clinic, sana yung iba masagot po natin ngayon. So I'm an early child development specialist by practice. I see kids for developmental screening. I also do parent coaching for families for kids who have developmental delays. Let's get started. I don't forget to record daw po. So nagawa ko na rin po yan. You can continue. So this is a disclaimer. So I have over 50 registrants for this session today, and I received over 30 questions from the several parents. In clinic po kasi I usually spend over an hour with each family. Kaya po ako nag-disclaimer kasi the information that we're sharing today is not going to be as exhaustive kumpara kung nag-one-on-one po tayo. Therefore, I can't say that it's medical advice, pero hopefully helpful pa rin po siya. As you hear, wrong spelling pa, some of the explanations and answers, keep in mind lang po na several factors po naman tayo, di ba, for our families and our kids. So every child has their individual difference. Every parent has their individual difference. Yung buong family din po natin magkakaiba. Temperament, developmental skills, cultures, and values, even medical backgrounds, etc. Sige. So ang ginawa ko na lang po, kaya po ako mag-slides. Usually wala po akong slides. Pero dahil sa dami pong pumasok na questions, I didn't want to miss anything or hopefully to catch as many as we can within the 30 minutes that we have. So general questions that I received and hopefully we'll tackle today were questions related to signs of autism, developmental delays, and late talkers. Meron din po, word for word po ito yung mga nasa slides. What are the early signs of late or advanced development for children? Several questions on ADHD, a few questions on potty training, and there are a few questions on screen time. So, start na po tayo, no? So, one of the questions was, how will you know that your child has speech delay or speech delay red flags? So, I wanted to start with this kasi throughout the pandemic, for the last 2 years of being both online and on-site na nagka-clinic, marami po language, usually speech po ang concern. So I think what we need to remember is when you say speech, speech is about expression. Nagsasalita, nagsasabi ng mga words. It's saying something. Pero before a child is actually speaking or having speech, marami po siyang kailangan pagdaanan, which is the concept of communication. So I'd like to reframe minsan na hindi lang po speech ang hinahanap natin from our kids. It's actually kung nagko-communicate po sila. And what do I mean by that? Ang skills po kasi in communication, pag nagsabi ako, naiintindihan mo. Pag nagsalita ka, naiintindihan ko din siya. So there's a back and forth, kumbaga conversation. And for very young kids, it starts from infancy, baby pa lang, so newborn. So I can see kids as young as newborn and show you that they know how to communicate or they try to communicate. And how do they do that? They express themselves by crying. They express themselves with their movements, their hand movements, their legs, yung nagkikicking kasi may kailangan po sila. Next to that, we need to make sure, are they hearing things? Narinig ba nila yung nasasabi natin? Nare-recognize ba nila tayo bilang caregiver po nila? Tapos nagkakaroon na rin ba sila ng mga sounds? Baby pa lang. Are they making those gurgling sounds in the back of their throat? Are they making the vocalizing sounds? Yung mga nagkuku, nagaa? And then, nag-develop ba yung mga gestures nila? Kasi before you have spoken words, gusto natin, yung mga kids natin, humihingi, nagpo-point, kung may kailangan, mag-reach, kung magpapacarry, mag-aangat ng hands. These are precursors for someone to talk. Kasi ang ibig sabihin, alam niya na kung may ginawa ako, may reciprocal na gagawin din si mommy, si daddy, si lola, si tito. So we need to make sure na meron po yung mga foundations po na yun before we reach the actual speech. So what I noticed is a lot of kids po natin, kaya po wala pang words when expected. Kasi sila mami na-Google eh. Sabi ni Google, kailangan 2-year-old nagto 2-word phrases. Pero if a child has not developed words yet, 0 siya or 10 salita lang po siya, hindi siya magto 2-word phrases kasi kulang yung vocabulary. And then when you look back on it, paano ba sila humingi? Some of them might pull your hand, some of them might push you towards what they need. But the other gestures, the other ways of communicating, wala pa po siya. So these are some signs of speech delay, or these become red flags to speech delay. So that's how I wanted to answer that question in a very long form. But hopefully helpful din po siya, no? Especially when we have the younger kids. Kasi very important po for them is that they're experiencing yung conversation, yung back and forth approach with an adult. So some specific questions, no? So there's someone who has a 22-month-old baby who's still not talking. What are the red flags specific for 19-month-olds? Is it a red flag if a 2-year-old has no words yet, but able to murmur or babble only? And then red flags for expression language delay for 18 months. Kaya ko po siya pinagsama po, no? If you'll notice, everyone's questions on this slide is talking, it's making sounds. So I do have to say that they are all flagged for a speech delay kasi usually between 18 to 24 months old, we want our children to already develop at least mga 10 to 20 words na rin po sana. We have some kids that have up to about 50 already. Kaya nga pag tungtong ng 2 years old, they are able to put words together. Medyo malawak naman po yung range. So usually our 2-year-olds, we want to have about 50 to about 200 words. So medyo range po kasi ang development. Recognizing iba-iba din naman yung rate of development ng each child. But to not have words yet at 2 years old is a cause for concern. So I would encourage for those families with children na talagang hindi pa natin mapalabas ang words natin. And even with all the exhaustive efforts po natin sa pagtuturo, it might be helpful po to have a developmental screening with your pediatrician or your specialist. We have therapists, child development practitioners, we have developmental behavioral pediatricians. These are our specialists who can help us if needed. Okay. Then other question that I thought was interesting din po was about counting words. Kasi going back si Google po kasi malamang sinabi po ni Google that we have to make sure that the children are able to speak a certain number of words. So ang tanong po ni mommy, counting the words of her 15-month-old, meron daw po siyang otak for orange. And does that count? And then how do you count the number of words? So when we want to count number of words, yung ina-advise ko sa families is you can do a word diary na po. You can make a version of a word diary na nililista nyo lang yung lahat ng sinasabi ng kid or the words that they know. But the other thing that you can do is may tatlong columns siya. The word that you think they're saying, how they're saying it, and kailan siya nagiging mastered. Kung OC lang po kayo, hindi naman talaga kailangan. So to answer the first question, OTA is an approximation and it sounds like orange, counted po siya. So the way we count words for the young kids is basta consistent yung sound and word used for the object at na 1-to-1 niya siya with the actual object. Makakount po natin siya as words. The second question is, if you use the word, does it have to be calling an object or simply to repeat it? When you're repeating it, that's what we call echoes or imitation. It's a good skill to have, pero hindi pa po natin masasabi na word na po siya until they are using it individually. Kumbaga, spontaneously po nilang ginagamit. So our count, and the reason why spontaneous po ang habol natin is gusto natin functional yung word. Gusto po natin yung mga vocabulary po na napipick up po ng mga anak natin. Nagagamit nila pang araw-araw. And this, I will go on my soapbox for a short while lang po. Kaya din po namin dinidiscourage ang mga flashcards. Kasi po, magaling po ang mga bata. Brain development ng kids, very fast po yan. So their memory can get very good. And so if let's say, napipick up na po nila yung mga words ng flashcards, ang question po dyan, yung mga words po ba yun? Nagagamit po nila, makiusap sa inyo? Or pang show and tell lang po ba si little girl, little boy? Kasi kaya niyang sabihin, flamingo, wala naman pong flamingo sa Pilipinas. So it's great that they are able to pick up the words, pero you have to make sure meron din po siya mga words, or unahin po natin sana mga words pang araw-araw. They want to drink milk, they want to play ball, they want to go outside, they want to ride the car. They need a comb, they need a spoon kasi kakain po sila. So unahin po sana natin mga common objects before yung mga uncommon po natin. And if they can learn both, okay lang din naman po. So yun, yan ang aking soapbox. Yung next few questions, and actually had several questions related to autism. So I wanted to tackle them then in series. So can I spot early signs of autism as young as 13 months? The answer is actually yes. Pero they are signs. They're not an indication na may autism po ang bata, no? So there's a difference between diagnosing a child with autism and seeing possible signs of autism. Kasi that's what it is. Symptoms lang po talaga siya. It's as if meron po tayong lagnat. Pero hindi po natin alam kung yung lagnat po ba natin ay COVID or yung lagnat po ba natin ay nagsinat lang po or may diarrhea po tayo or may ubusipon from another virus. So they're just a sign and they're not necessarily a diagnosis. So I've done research work. I've worked with UC Davis in the past. Sila po as young as 6 months, nagsiscreen na po sila for autism po. So pwede po, may mga early signs po tayong dinidetect. And the importance of detecting early or the possible symptoms is para mabigyan po ng intervention. Okay? So, meron po akong not so short summary. Ang DSM-5 po, ginagamit po siya ng mga professionals to help in our diagnosis of children with autism. I'm sharing it here not because magda-diagnose po kayo, pero gusto ko po siyang ipaalam po kung ano po ba ang challenges na isang batang may autism. So, ang batang may autism, may dalawang main challenges po sila. Social communication, and meron po silang mga behaviors, restricted and repetitive behaviors. Usually, ang mga bata na may social communication challenges, itong tatlo po, lahat yan, swak sila. One, social reciprocity. Ang ibig sabihin po ng social reciprocity is meron kayong back and forth communication. Di ba po kaninang sinabi ko po ang language, kailangan po marunong mag-give and take, makinig, marinig, at sumagot. So back and forth and sharing of interests and understanding emotions. Kaya din po siguro when you see the red flags na nakalista sa Google at napapansin niyo yung mga kids who might have language delays, niisip po natin may autism po ba ang bata? So that is one possible sign of autism, but it's also a sign of language delay. The second one po is nonverbal communication. And why is that important? Nonverbal communication is my social aspect po yan eh. Pag nag-gesture po ako, pag ginawa ko po ba to, kung nag-frown po ako, kasama na rin po ang eye contact. That's a social cue eh. It's saying na pag tumingin ako in one direction or tiningnan kita, gets mo na I want to communicate or converse with you. And if our children don't have nonverbal skills yet, then their social communication is challenged also. And then the third one, pag sinama po si 1 and 2, it makes number 3 hard for them. So developing, maintaining, and understanding relationships. Ibig sabihin, hindi sila maka-adjust to social context. Baka mahirap din po sa kanila to have interests in other people and to have friends. But you have to remember, for very young kids, it's hard to tell kasi a lot of them are still learning it. So if you'll notice, you might go to a doctor and they'll be like, I'm not sure, but possible. Kaya po tayo nagsiscreen, kaya din po tayo nag-assess. So social communication, yun po yung tatlo. But in addition po kasi sa socializing skills po ng mga bata at language delay, meron din po silang on the other side, restricted behaviors na sinasabi natin. Yung iba po, of these four, they don't need to have all of them, but they can have some. So meron po silang mga repetitive behaviors, linya lang po silang laruan. They'll want to just say the same thing over and over again. They'll probably want to keep flipping objects or flapping their hands. Yun po ang mga repetitive motor behaviors. Meron din po tayong mga nagsispeech or ang echolalia, different from echoing, is yung as in bone script. No, na-echo po nila minsan. Tas yun lang po parating sinasabi. Hindi nag-change. An insistence on sameness or inflexible, whether how they do something or how they say something, kailangan in that order parati siyang sinasabi. There's a restricted or fixated interest. Ito po usually nakikita ko po siya on older children. The topic, lahat ng planets, kilala, everything about the solar system, alam. Pag nag-usap tayo ng animals, ayaw nila, babalik din tayo sa planets. So yun po, medyo fixated yung interests po nila. And then we have some children who might have hypoactivity, sorry for the typo there, on sensory input. So ibig sabihin, galaw ng galaw, pwede din po, senses natin is not just movement, pwede po siyang vision, pwede siyang taste, pwede siyang touch, pwede siyang sight. So if medyo hypo, the signs there are titingin siya sobrang close, up close, or kailangan pa side glance kasi yun na yung gusto niyang tingnan. Hearing, either too loud or too soft. If we're talking about texture, yung iba, ayaw nila na kailangan cotton lang, bawal may tag. So because there are some hypersensitivities to certain things. So these are kumbaga, the signs of the possibility of autism as a symptom. So the next few questions are the specific questions po ng parents. No? So regarding on showing toys to caregivers and responding to his name, and then a 2-year-old who is tracking lines while walking or even when he's sitting, he will look at straight lines. So if you remember kanina sinabi ko po, we have to put everything in context. So showing the toy to the caregiver and responding to name, yes, nasa checklist po siya pag tinitingnan po natin ng symptoms. Pero in what context? When I call you to come and eat, do you turn to your name when I call you? Or are you sharing? Are you able to show joy with the toy that you're doing? And it can be as literal na nagbe-build ka, titingin ka kay mommy and see kung mag-share kayo ng enjoyment on what you're playing. So that's what we're looking for sana, yung connection po with another person, not just the act of, here, I want to show you my toy, but the act na join tayo, may relationship po tayo. And so there are some children also with that special interest. So if let's say the 2-year-old na nag-track ng lines, tapos lahat ng lines kailangan lakarin, lahat ng lines kailangan tingnan. It can be typical because a 2-year-old is still exploring, but you are correct, pwede din po siya maging signs. So ang context natin dyan is how are their social communication skills? Kaya din po ba ni 2-year-old's little boy to do other things in addition to his interests in the lines? Let's give our children a chance in terms of ano pa yung mga kaya po sana nilang gawin. Another person who had asked, bakit daw po nagkakaroon ng autism ng isang bata? Dahil po ba siya nainom ng gamot during pregnancy? Outright, the answer is not sure. No? We cannot say the medicines will necessarily cause autism. Pero I think it's more important is kamusta yung environment po while the child is a baby. But just so that everyone also knows, the autism medyo unknown po talaga ang cause niya, but it is a neurodevelopmental disability, meaning it targets your brain development and your neurologic development. So if let's say during pregnancy, meron po na-introduce na trauma, whether to the mom, to the child, or the environmental lang din, a lot of things that are out of our control. It might have an effect on the genetics of the child. Kaya po nagkakaroon ng effect on brain development. Pero we actually cannot say, except for the 5 to 10% na talagang nakita na po nila sa genes yung cause. Everything else, we are not sure as to why. So yun, maybe the last thing I want to say lang with children with autism, I work with a lot of families with autism. It's my personal love to really work on it, is you have to realize that you might have symptoms of autism or you might have autism. But the bottom line din po kasi is that when you look at the challenges, deficits po siya, kakulangan. Meaning they're missing experiences to learn from. So the most important way to help our children who have, whether it's language delay or whether they have a disability, is to build a relationship with them so that they can learn in context po sana. Kasi gusto natin yung skills nga po nila is to relate with another person. Kaya naman po nagiging concern po yung mga language and behavior concerns is kasi it comes out na misbehavior na sila or bad behaviors kasi hindi na sila marunong makitulong yung properly with another person. So I think that's what we have to remember when we're talking about children who have delays, is that are we giving them enough support para may relationship siya? It's not the toys that will teach our children, it will be the people around them who will teach our child. Okay, I added this slide because if you remember my mini summary for autism is that there are sensory concerns for some of our children. So how do I minimize crying every time my 2-year-old gets something icky on his body, like even a grain of rice or a drop of water? And then another child who is intentionally hurting themselves or having a meltdown. Hindi ko po sinasabi na may autism po yung mga bata, no? But I wanted to point it out na I think these children might these children are having similar concerns. So medyo different yung questions, pero ang na-realize ko sa kanya is that after reading it a few times, medyo parehong concerns nila. These children are actually having a difficult time soothing their bodies and soothing themselves. Yung approach lang and yung root cause lang ng lack of ability to soothe, medyo different. Kasi si number 1 child, yung icky, yung touch, hindi niya ma-soothe yung sensory systems niya. So kung nakatouch siya ng malagkit or kung may nakatouch sa skin niya, it feels uncomfortable. And so what happens is, kailangan natin tulungan ng brain development niya na masanay sa mga different sensory inputs. So yun po yung sinasabi po nilang sensory play. Pwede po tayo mag-introduce ng different ways of playing in a safe way na mas controlled po sana ni little child on when they can touch, what they can touch, and for how long they can touch it. Kasi what we can work on is desensitizing them to the situation. When they reach the crying state, though, we have to understand this. Hindi po nila sinasadya to upset you, no? Hindi po nila purpose to make you angry with them. Pero for them internally, the touch just feels bad, and they might need consoling when it happens. No? And then I wanted to do the meltdown question also. Kasi ang meltdown po is actually different. I need to point out meltdown is different from tantrums. A meltdown is a child who can't soothe themselves kasi hindi nila ma-regulate yung emotions po nila. So kumbaga, there's a saying in English na they blow their top. So they flip their lid. And hindi nila iniisip naman I want to hurt themselves, but more of I don't know what to do with this feeling anymore. Kaya iiyak ko siya para at least ma-release ko yung level of feelings and emotions that I have. So crying kasi is a reflex. So it goes back to our primitive, magka-cry na lang tayo. That's why our babies cry. Our babies are crying out of reflex, out of a need na nafe-feel nila in their bodies. And siguro ang nangyayari din, kaya nag-hit ng head, is that there's a control. And this is just a hypothesis, hindi ko po siya talagang masabi, is that I feel that there's a need to try to control, pero hindi pa po kasi nila kaya mag-control kasi 2 years old pa nga lang po siya. So for me, if you were to say nag-meltdown na po talaga yung child, at least 5-10 minutes talagang hindi siya natatahan. Tatahan lang siya kasi pagod na siya. That means hindi niya talaga kaya. And these are the children that I would probably want to soothe. I would probably want to help calm down earlier than a 45-minute breakdown. Kasi hindi pa po nila kaya. Iba pa po siya pag tantrums po, no? Pag nagka-tantrums po kasi ang kids, you have to find out kung tantrum po ba yan, is it behavior, is it dahil hindi niya masabi yung gusto niya, and ano po yung nag-trigger, kasi may ABCs yan eh. Yung tantrum is a B, it's a behavior lang. So kailangan natin isipin, ano ba nag-trigger sa behavior na to? Ano yung consequence? Ano yung nangyayari? If mayroong pinagbabawal, nag-tantrum, tapos binigay nyo, and then what the child learns is, pag may gusto ko, pag na-tantrum ako, nakukuha ko po siya. So it's, if the children are smart enough, yun yung pattern na masusundan. So those are tantrums, no? So what would have to happen is break po natin. Pag sinabi natin no po talaga siya. Pero baka depending on how old your child is, bibigyan po natin siya ng alternative. Not this, but this. Pero kailangan consistent. So kung bawal talaga, bawal. And if they don't want to take the alternative, that's their choice to not take it. Pero syempre, ang alternatives na ibibigay natin sa kanila is actually things that we're going to allow them to have, and there's an option for them to take it. Sige. So the next question was, good day, doc. Meron daw po siyang 4-year-old na always tiptoes when walking. He's somehow flat-footed. Is this normal? And the question on tiptoeing in general. So the tiptoeing question I wanted to tackle, kasi there's a possibility that this is no longer normal. You might need to check in with your pediatrician or neurologist or rehab doctor, kasi ang check po natin dyan is kamusta ang muscle growth and motor growth po ng kids po natin. So our child might be walking pero yung quality po ng muscles natin are not so good. So kailangan po ng additional exercises for that. Flat foot kasi and the tiptoes can be signs of low muscle tone for our kids. Okay. I received a question. Let me tackle this. So meron po bang meron po bang ways para mapakain ng kanin ang 3-year-old daughter? More on bottle feeding pa din kami. Though kumakain naman siya ng mga biscuits and crackers, pero ayaw niya ng rice and fruits. Oh, I'm so sorry to hear that. And that's very hard. Kasi one, culture po natin, Filipino, may hindi po tayo kumain. And it's hard when our children don't want to join us. So ways are a little bit harder kasi 3 years old na po siya. So that means meron po tayong mga habits kailangan po ma-break, no? Our children meron po tayong sinasabi na division of responsibilities when feeding. Kung gusto po natin mag-introduce po ng food, usually ang parent gets to choose what the child is going to eat, where they're going to eat. And then si child po, ang pipiliin po niya is how much po yung usually kakainin po nila. So I would suggest is, without force feeding them, we want to be able to give them opportunities to actually eat the food na pinipresent po natin sa kanila. And hindi lang po yung literal na put food on a spoon and put the spoon in the mouth, tapos susubo lang, hanggang subo lang siya. What we have to realize is ang kain po kasi experiential learning din po siya. Katulad siya ng language and motor skill, lahat ng mga iba pang milestones po natin. Ang kain po, may milestones din po siya. We have to remember kasi or think about, nung baby po ba siya, were they given a chance to see food, touch food, smell food, taste it? And then as you grow up, ganun din pa rin po, no? They need to have an opportunity to to keep seeing, trying, tasting, and eating. At hindi lang at the time that you sit down. Pwede din po kasi natin isama yung opportunities to see food in the supermarket, during the preparation time, during the cleanup time. So yung kain po kasi natin is not just sitting on the high chair and eating. I would probably encourage for the picky eaters na ayaw pa mag-explore ng food is to introduce food outside of eating and not necessarily force feeding it yet. And then for those na bottle feeding nga po is you might want to feed food first, bottle later. And then a 3-year-old din po kasi usually 2 to 3 bottles, I think 1 to 2 bottles na lang po sila a day dapat kasi mas food intake na po siya. And we also have to remember na just because we think they're picky, we still need to continue introducing the food kasi we need to introduce it at consistently for them to have an opportunity to try. Ang nangyayari din po sa iba, baka picky eater na nga po siya, ay ayaw niya yan. Hindi na po niya nakikita pa or nakikita na yung food na yon. So nawalan na rin po siya ng opportunities to try it. So I know hindi po siya exhaustive. Marami din po kasi components ng feeding. We have feeding specialists po that spend hours with our families trying to target these. Pero if let's say hindi pa rin po, we do have specialists. Mommy, please feel free to reach out kung gusto po natin magpa-consult for that. Oh my, it's 9:02. Sige. I will just answer the last question na lang sa chat box para mas helpful because you're here. The question is kung matuturuan how to teach potty training. Potty training has requirements. If you have a 3-year-old, then usually what you have to check for is readiness. And when I say readiness, does the child already show that they know when they need to poop and pee? Ibig sabihin, they actually are able to control the time. Parang mas napapansin po natin na they are peeing at longer times, parang mas naho-hold nila. So, ibig sabihin, mas may control na po sila on when they pee and they poo. Kailangan din po na communication-wise, nakakapag-indicate na po sila that they want to go potty or they need to be changed. And they don't need to make this perfect. Kailangan lang to make sure that they know how to say it also. And then the last one siguro is the readiness of the family to be able to take them the moment that they need to go also. And siguro on a side note, kailangan din there's no fear of the potty as well. Kaya po yung iba nag-resort pa to having a potty chair, but there are some who are able to use the regular potty na straight na rin po. So usually nangyayari po kasi is we want to make sure that they're not afraid of the water, they're not afraid of the flushing, or if they are, we make what's this called? We make ways so that mas comfortable sila. You either hold them closer, tas kayo na po mag-flush. Kumbaga, let's set them up for success. Like I am not of the practice of desensitizing our kids by traumatizing them po kasi. No. So yun po. Baka kailangan natin makita muna yung mga signs that they're ready to potty train. And then if they are, we work on it. So introduce the potty, walk to the banyo once in a while. Pwede po silang sumama sa inyo. They can get used to the idea of sitting on the chair without insisting that they stay there or they poop or they pee. And then you can move from there. Siyempre, different thoughts, no? Kasi mayroon din po mga iba, may strategies po talaga sila, behavioral. Every 15 minutes punta sa banyo. So sometimes that also works. But you have to remember that it works for some, not for all. So we try to gauge lang. They're very important lang din po yung mga basics natin for potty training. Oh, I got one more question. Thank you for sending. Is it normal that even when ASD kids undergo therapy, they still develop difficult behavior? The answer is yes po, no? Actually, all children. When we go to therapy po kasi hindi po fairy godmother ang ating mga therapists, hindi po kasi nawawala ang behavior concerns. What our therapists usually help us do is develop strategies para ma-address natin ang mga difficult behaviors that come up. Kasi depending on how severe or mild po ang autism. Autism kasi will always have, it's a chronic condition po, medyo lifelong po siya. So as they grow up, they'll encounter, di ba tayo as we grow up, we encounter challenges growing up. So ibig sabihin, nagkakaroon nga ng challenges yung child with autism. Isama nyo pa yung mga challenges nila ng socialization and mga repetitive behaviors po nila. Mas lalo silang nahihirapan mag-adjust to what they're going to experience. So talaga pong may lumalabas din po mga difficult behaviors as they're growing up. And so what's best is partner po tayo sa therapist po natin na, teach, nagkakaroon ng mga bagong experiences si anak. Kailangan natin siguro isipan ng paraan kung paano natin i-introduce itong bagong situation na to sa kanila. Para yung difficult behaviors, either it's gonna happen or we're going to lessen it or ma-avoid natin siya. Pero hindi po natin masasabi na mawawala ang difficult behaviors altogether. Baka mangyari lang po is magiging mas manageable po siya. In a lot of the families I work with din po, pati yung magulang, yung parents, the family members, it's personal development. Nag-change din po yung mga temperaments po natin. Or hindi naman yung the temperaments usually stay, but our patients might also change also. Kasi as they grow up, mas maintindihan natin yung mga personal differences po natin as a person and how we relate to the individual difference of our child with or without a diagnosis po. So I hope that helps. Okay. The other questions, siguro gagawin ko na lang ng sagot sometime on the social media pages. I did go overtime. Sorry about that. For the parents who are here, maraming salamat for your time and for allowing me to talk for the last 40 minutes. If you're welcome to join us again next July. We have Dr. Tipi Tanchanko, who's a developmental behavioral pediatrician. Okay. With that, let me wish you all a good day ahead. Ingat po kayo. I'll see you again soon.